Good evening. This is the Thursday, April 12th, 2012 meeting of the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals. Will you call the roll, please?
Timothy Biggs.
Here.
Dean Carr.
Here.
Jeff Ron.
Here.
Joshua Fink. Ann Denny. Kate Williams. Here. Dale Patrick.
Here.
John Dunham.
Here.
Deanna Willard. Here.
We have a quorum this evening for all the those in attendance for the board to hear and pass a motion. The majority of the fully constituted board is required. The board total number of board members is 9, so a requirement of 5 votes in favor of a motion are necessary, and with the 7 people in attendance this evening, we can achieve that. We have no minutes before us this evening, so that moves us on to special order of business disclosures. Are there any disclosures to announce this evening? Mr. Patrick.
Yes, I have 2 disclosures tonight. In case 2012-042, the company I work for issued a letter of non-objection. One of my employees did, and I have no issues with it, but it does not affect my hearing of this case.
And the letter of non-objection was with respect to?
Utility easement with ACS.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. So do you feel that you have, just to reconfirm, you do not feel you have a conflict of interest as presented?
No, I do not.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. And your second disclosure?
As in the case of 2012-043, I work with the son of the applicant trustee.
I'm trying to track that one.
Yeah. Well, the application is a trustee, so
Okay,
the trust.
I see. And with respect to a conflict of interest in that matter, actually, let me back up a little bit, and let's deal with your first disclosure. With respect to that was case 2012-042. Could I get a motion to direct Mr. Patrick to participate in that case? Mr. Ron.
So moved. Second.
I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Ron, you've indicated?
Indeed, yeah. So move to direct Mr. Patrick to participate in the case.
Thank you. And a second?
I second it.
Are you on the floor, or if it's not showing up?
You don't, oh, for a while you didn't exist there, Mr. Dunham. Thank you. Mr. Dunham is second. Is there any discussion? Is there any objection to Mr. Patrick to the motion? Seeing none, Mr. Patrick, you are directed to participate in case 2012-042. Now, with respect to the second disclosure, again, could you repeat that, please?
I work with the son of the, I guess it's the applicant or trustee, and I don't see any conflict there, but I just wanted to disclose it.
Thank you. So you do not feel that you have any substantial interest in this with respect to either the case or the applicant?
No, sir, I don't.
The case number is 2012-043. Is there any, are there any board comments to Mr. Patrick? If not, could I have a motion, positive motion? Thank you. Mr. Vig, you've indicated that motion. And a second, Mr. Dunham. Is there any discussion on Mr. Patrick's participation? Is there any objection? Seeing none, Mr. Patrick, you are directed to participate in that case. Are there any other disclosures this evening? Yes, Mr. Vig.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on the consent agenda, the resolutions for approval, number 2012-003, I recused myself from hearing that case and did not participate, and would like my vote on the remainder of the consent agenda to stand, but that one I will not be voting in favor of, as I won't be.
You'll be abstaining from
I'll
that.
be abstaining from that one.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vig. Ms. Williams.
I will be abstaining from all of the resolutions on the consent agenda, as I did not participate in the February or March board meetings, public hearings.
Just one. Okay, we need to catch up here. Are you ready? Yeah. Are there any other, actually, we're on to the consent agenda, and Mr. Vig, and you've indicated you would be abstaining from voting on case resolution 2012-003. Ms. Williams, you will be abstaining from voting on all four. Yeah, I'm going to do that right now. That's okay. And I also was not in attendance for the hearing for Resolution 2012-003, so we'll be abstaining from that case as well. So with that, we do not have sufficient quorum to act on that resolution, so I would entertain a motion to pull or to postpone that item. Yeah. Mr. Ron, did you move? Is that?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so perhaps we can pull and postpone that.
Move to pull resolution number 2012-003 from the consent agenda for the intensive purpose of delaying it.
And could we postpone it till the next?
The next regular board meeting, please, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. We have.
That's what I was doing.
The rest of the meeting is going to go a lot smoother than this. So we need a motion on the consent agenda. And Mr. Ron, I'm sure that you would move to approve the consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda, Mr. Chair.
Second, Mr. Patrick?
Second.
Thank you. And Mr. Ron, do you now have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to pull resolution number 2012-003 and postpone it until our next regular board meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Patrick, you second that?
Second that.
All right, thank you. Are there any, is there any objection to pulling that item? It was unanimous. All right. All right. We have the three resolutions for approval. Is there any further discussion on the consent agenda? Any objection to pass? Mr. We're good? There's no objections to the passage of the consent agenda? Do we need to vote? Okay. Seeing none, the consent agenda has passed, which brings us, we have no appearance requests, no unfinished businesses. There are no items on the regular agenda. Brings us to Agenda Item H, Public Hearings. Before we hear our first case this evening, there are copies of each of the cases. For those that don't have them or wish to read the staff packet for each of the cases in the lobby on the way into the chambers. Prior to us hearing our first case this evening, I would like to read the order of business for variance hearings. The chair shall introduce the variance and explain the procedure to be followed. The variance case number and the name of the applicant shall be read into the record. The board shall hear and rule on any objections to the sufficiency of notice. The board shall hear a brief staff presentation outlining the variance, not to exceed 10 minutes. On conclusion of the staff presentation, the board members and the applicant may then direct questions to the staff through the chair. The applicant shall give his or her presentation not to exceed 10 minutes. Throughout the proceedings, the burden of proof rests upon the applicant, who must convince the board by a preponderance of the evidence that the variance should be granted. On conclusion of the applicant's presentation, the board members and the staff may then direct questions to the applicant through the chair. The hearing shall then be open for public testimony. Each person has 3 minutes. All persons who testify may be questioned by the board, staff, or the applicant. On conclusion of the public testimony, the staff, followed by the applicant, shall have the right of rebuttal, 3 minutes each. The board shall proceed to develop oral findings and conclusions with regard to the variance and disposition of the variance. The staff shall reduce the oral findings and conclusions to writing for subsequent adoption by the board at a later meeting. The matter then rests with the board, and the chair asks for a positive motion from the board. That brings us to our first case this evening, Case 2012-041. The petitioner is James R. Stone. Is the petitioner here this evening? Thank you. And who from staff will be presenting this case? Ms. O'Brien, could you provide us with the sufficiency of notice, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On March 20th, 49 public hearing notices were mailed. Of the 49 public hearing notices, 3 were returned, 3 were returned unclaimed, 2 were returned in favor, none opposed, with the exception of there was a comment received late yesterday afternoon writing in opposition to the variance. That was laid on the table tonight.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Would you proceed with the staff presentation, please?
Okay. This is a variance from AMC 2145-210, the stream protection setback. This is in an R6 suburban residential district, and the variance request is to allow a rock retaining wall that is located within the 25-foot creek easement to remain. The property is Lot 11, Block 3, Sutton Estate, Addition Number 2. It's located at the southern terminus of Sutton Drive on the east side of Little Peters Creek. In describing the situation that exists regarding this variance, the petition site is a long and narrow, irregularly shaped lot. Little Peters Creek forms the west petition site boundary. The petition site is also impacted by variable and steep topography. There's an average estimated slope of approximately 10% overall. However, portions of the lot experience slopes well over 55%. The R6 zoning district requires a 50-foot front yard, 25-foot side yards, and 50-foot rear yard setback. The house, which was constructed in 2010, is located 13.8 feet from the east side yard setback. However, a variance was not requested for this particular encroachment, which measures 11.2 feet into the east side yard setback. A preliminary plat has been approved by the platting authority to incorporate 1 acre of Evans subdivision, which adjoins the east property boundary, into the current to incorporate it into the boundaries of the petitions lot. When this plat is recorded, it is not now recorded, that will eliminate the need for a variance for the encroachment into the east side yard setback. So therefore, a variance was not requested because it is being resolved by other means, which is platting. However, as a result of the investigation of the property, wetlands were determined to exist in that portion of Evans subdivision that is being incorporated into the petition site. The as-built survey was recertified in March of this year. It does depict a residential structure toward the southern end of the lot with a driveway that extends from Souton Drive. The dwelling is served by on-site utilities with the septic standpipes located on the north side of the house and a well located on the south side of the house. There is also a driveway that is located within the creek, the outer 15 feet of the creek setback, but that is an allowed use under AMC 2145-210. So a variance was not requested for the driveway. In reviewing the standards for a variance, all of the standards appear to be substantially met. As mentioned, there are physical characteristics of the lot in terms of a steep slope, wetlands, a creek forming the western property boundary, and the irregularly shaped lot, which are all characteristics that are related to the physical nature of the petition site. Though the combination of the creek, slope, wetlands, and the shape of the lot do limit the developable area within which a house could be constructed on the property. So the strict application of the code would produce substantial hardship for the applicant, and therefore that standard appears to be met as well. The hardship is not self-imposed. The special conditions do arise from the physical characteristics of the property. And if the variance is granted, it will not adversely affect the use of adjacent property. Lot 2, Evans subdivision, is a 40-acre parcel. The tract in Souton to the west is a 49-acre parcel. The dwelling units on these two lots are approximately 2,400 feet separated from the dwelling unit on the petition site. So there really would not be any immediate adverse impact on the adjoining lots. The variance is intended, it does meet the intent of the code. The purpose of a variance is to bring a lot that has physical characteristics into parity with the adjoining lots. Other lots in the surrounding area do not have the combination of such a long, narrow configuration, slope, creek, as well as wetlands. They may be impacted by one or two of these types of physical characteristics, but the lots are more regularly shaped, and especially the adjoining lots are substantially larger than the petition site. The variance is granted. The variance would not affect the health, safety, and welfare. It does not allow a use that is not already permitted in the R6 district, and it is the minimum variance necessary in order to allow the retaining wall to remain in its current location. The retaining wall itself, scaled on the as-built survey, is approximately 85 feet long. 73 feet of that 85 is located within the creek setback. However, the creek does run the entire 543-foot length of the east property boundary, so it really is the minimal variance required to allow it to remain in its current location. The house, by virtue of the configuration of the lot, it was constructed only 5 feet from the creek setback. So given all of the above narration, it does appear that the 7 standards are substantially met. The department does recommend approval of the request for the variance from AMC 2145-210, subject to 3 conditions. Number 1, the final plat for the new subdivision must be recorded prior to this variance becoming effective, because there is a nonconformity on the lot that will be resolved by the recording of the plat. Also, there's a recommendation to place a note on the plat that if the variance is granted, the municipality will be held harmless if in the future there is any adverse impact on adjoining properties upstream or downstream from this, and it shall be the sole responsibility of the applicant to remedy any adverse effects. And then the variance shall become effective upon recordation of a notice of zoning action, which cannot be done until the plat is recorded. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Are there any questions of staff by any of the board members? Mr. Ron.
Thank you, through the chair. Ms. O'Brien, was Watershed Management solicited for comments in this case? And if so, do they have any response?
Through the chair, Mr. Ron, was who solicited?
I may have the title wrong, but Watershed Management, I'm not sure which municipal organization is in charge of floodplain reviews.
That would be, could be Watershed Management Services. Yes, they are typically solicited. They're routed with the application. And comments were not received, I believe, from Watershed Management. And I'm looking to see if floodplain responded. I don't see comments from either Watershed Management or floodplain. Building Safety didn't, and Public Works Department had no objection, or no comment, actually.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of staff? Seeing none, if the applicant could come forward, please. Could you state and spell your name for the record, please?
My name is James Stone. Last name spelled S-T-O-N-E, like a rock.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. And again, you have a maximum of 10 minutes for your presentation, and if your presentation can address the 7 standards, please.
You didn't give me that part till now, but okay, I'll give it my best shot.
Or let me rephrase it. We must find that all 7 standards are met. So.
Yes, sir. Understand. I thought Mrs. O'Brien did a great job and did a better job explaining it in her planning response than I did in my write-up. So I thank her for that, and I thank her for the recommendation to approve. And I thank the board for the opportunity to speak tonight. The physical circumstances, the exceptional makes this different. Is like she talked about the uniqueness of the lot is not a rectangular lot. It's a very slender lot. My wife was here in 2006. I don't know if it was in front of this board, but to rezone that lot from an R10 to R6 because it wasn't usable at that time. I've nicknamed this project the money pit for my wife. I'm trying to do this for her final thing in my military moves. But anyway, for the shape is it slopes, like Mr. O'Brien said, from the south to the north. In that finding, or the rezoning, the planning department came back and said there's one area in that lot that can be built on pretty much, and that's exactly where we ended up putting the home. Not because that's where their finding was. It's just the only great place. It's the best place to put the house, and pretty much the only place to put it. In the construction of the house, also, our original intent was to give passage around the opposite side of the house. The original plan was to buy the adjacent lot as we went through this process, and we've been trying to do that ever since, but kind of stuck in several different things that happened. One was wetlands were found in that area, and so we had to go through the Corps to get a permit because we were trying to put the septic also in that general vicinity before the wetlands were found. Ended up moving the septic. Wetlands are still there, which prevents passage around that side of the house. So pretty much limited us to the opposite side, which is over beside the creek. The area we're talking about where the rocks are put in was an area that was already built up. All we did was reinforce it with rock that was taken from other areas in the lot. It's aesthetic. There's it's as minimal as possible to impact the local area. I worked heavily with watershed management, Jeff Urbanis out there several times to look at not only that, but other areas where we had come close enough to the setback. He wanted me to do some things, which we fixed over time. So he was the one that actually said I need to go through this process to get this variance. So that's why I'm here today. Undue hardship. The well had to be put in the back of the house. The septic's in the front. Well is in the back corner, so in order to get access to that, we've got to go around that side. That rock wall kind of protects that route to get around that side. In addition, if you wanted to get around for any other reason, for safety reasons or whatever, that's the access that you'd have to use. So that reinforces it. Let's see. I guess and the hardship, number 3, talked about the lot and how it's set up already. Variance of granted does not adversely affect adjacent property. Each side of the 40-acre lot on my right and the 40-acre on my left, the 40-acre to the west and the 40-acre to the east, both of those lots go straight up the side. So the area that I'm talking about purchasing, that 1 acre where those wetlands are, is actually the only other flat area around. Lot goes up, and the house on the Beck property that I'm buying the chunk from, their house sits up probably 400 feet above my house. So they're not impacted at all. And then the other house, I'm not sure it's even built on that side. Actually, it is. It's built several thousand feet away from where my house is. So it's not going to impact there. It's basically on the opposite side of the creek from where my house is. It's a cliff for the most part. And then also the creek, in the history of the creek, before I actually purchased the land, I was told that creek's never flooded. It is a year-round running creek. It runs all the time, even this past year. So, and we've lived there for about a year now, I guess, and I've never seen it flood, although it does some interesting flow in terms of growing, but never comes outside of the bank. It is within keeping with the code. Mr. Bryan already addressed that. Variance of grant doesn't adversely affect health, safety. I think this actually helps with safety and health. Again, it's the water in the back, fire department, health, and human services, whoever, in order to get back there. It doesn't impact noise or air or anything like that. And it is the minimum amount that I'm asking for with the variance, just the directly adjacent. And again, that rock wall is just basically reinforcing what was already there. I'd probably say there's a semi-rock wall there to begin with, but I guess that's it, sir, unless you've got any other questions for me.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Are there any questions of the petitioner by any of the board members? Mr. Vig.
Thank you. Mr. Stone, you said that that the shape of the ground wasn't really modified there, but you placed rocks from other parts of your lot on that slope to protect it. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So is it really a retaining wall that's Stack one stone on top of it?
No, sir, it's not a retaining wall. It's just rocks that are just put up against that bank to reinforce that bank. So it's not really a retaining wall. Probably not a good and adequate description of it.
Okay.
That's a better picture of it.
All right. Thank you.
Are there other questions of the petitioner?
I guess, can I add real quick?
Sure. You have time remaining.
Never been good with the parliamentary procedures, but I'll also say that rock wall is not right up. I said it was on a bank. It's not. It's about starts probably 10, 15 feet off of the creek, so it's not up against the creek directly.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Are there any other questions? Mr. Ron, I can't tell if you're deciding or not. I don't want to cut you off if you're not. Yes, Mr. Ron.
Thank you, through the chair. Mr. Stone, what was your level of awareness of the stream setback when you placed your home and this retaining wall?
The setback from the creek, I was not aware of the issue that when we placed that there. So it was something that came up after the fact when the watershed management, Jeff Urbanis, came out, and they came out for a site visit when they were actually doing the construction and said we had impacted the setback, and that's when we found out, and we started working with it. There were 3 other areas where we had cleared some land. There were 3 other areas where it had gone in within about 5 feet of that setback, so still well outside away from the river, but I had to go back in and plant natural, and I've already did that this past year. So.
One final question for you, Mr. Stone. Is the septic the only limiting factor on trying to access the well area from the east of your building?
No, it's the watershed, or it's the wetlands. The Corps went out and delineated the wetlands actually that exist on that opposite side, and it blocks that entire side. The septic runs adjacent to the house. Away from the septic, the wetlands is protected by a curtain drain, actually, that the Corps permitted me to put in, or my my contractor to put in, probably 2 years ago now, I guess. But anyway, that curtain drain was put in underneath the Corps' eye, and anyway, that protects the septic, but it doesn't leave any room for a pass over on that other side.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, does staff have any questions of the applicant, Ms. O'Brien? Do you have any questions of the applicant?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. If you'll have a seat, then we will open the hearing up for public testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The hearing is open for public testimony. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify on this case? Anyone at all? Seeing no one, the public hearing is closed. Does staff have any rebuttal?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Mr. Stone, there hasn't been any public testimony to rebut, but nonetheless, do you have any rebuttal? He has indicated that he does not. With that, the matter rests with the board. Could I have a positive motion with this case? Mr. Dunham, thank you. Indicated motion?
Yes.
Ms. Williams, you've indicated you would second?
Yes.
I guess I ought to wait for Mr. Dunham to make his motion.
Okay.
Mr. Dunham.
Mr. Chairman, in the case of 2012-041, I move that the board grant a variance from AMC 2145-210 for the R6 residential district to allow rock retaining wall to be located within 25 feet within the 25-foot creek easement.
That's subject to, I believe there's 3 conditions on
Subject to staff
page 11.
recommendations on page Just a minute, Mr. Chairman. Page 11, 3 conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Ms. Williams, you've indicated you would second that motion?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Mr. Dunham, would you speak to your motion, please?
Mr. Chairman, I intend to support this variance request. I concur with staff's recommendations that all 7 conditions have been met.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Ms. Williams?
I also intend to support this motion, and I don't have anything to add besides the staff's, I think, very excellent walkthrough of all of the standards and why they're met.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Is there further discussion by board members? Mr. Vig?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with staff's analysis. I think it was well done and easy to follow. I'm a little bit troubled by the fact that watershed management doesn't have a formal response. Other cases where we've had what would appear to be smaller streams and different, less impact type situations, they've weighed in with a comment of non-objection, and I'm a little bit troubled in this case that they haven't done that, and I would like to hear from some other board members, perhaps, if we've taken a position on a request, lacking this kind of a statement from an agency.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Mr. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Vig, for bringing that up. I asked the question and didn't know how to follow up with staff, and that's because I don't know what position we really can take as a board, but would entertain some further discussion. It's a sticking point for me as well. I believe the majority of the standards have been met based on the way they're worded, given the conditions of the lot, but that lack of input from what I consider to be the most critical municipal organization in this case is, like I said, a sticking point.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Question for staff. Ms. O'Brien? Ms. O'Brien, was there any discussion, to your knowledge, with the watershed on this case? I know in the past we have heard there's just been communications between staff, and that's been sufficient for this board. Have you had any discussions with watershed?
Mr. Chair, I understand that watershed management, Jeff Urbanis was mentioned tonight, has worked closely with Mr. Stone, and there did not appear to be any concerns regarding the location. It was described to me as a rock retaining wall rather than being a reinforcement of the bank, if I understand, of the river. But I will pass the board's concerns that even though there may not be concerns on the part of staff, a no comment or a no objection is still a very important comment. So I will speak with and just advise them that we really need to get their comments on these types of cases.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. I would like to weigh in if I could, and I do feel that we have staff's presentation before us, and I intend to support the motion finding that all 7 standards have been met. I do note that there have been comments from on-site as well as street maintenance that speak specifically to the drainage, and the petitioner's indicated that he has been working with Mr. Urbanis. Staff has indicated that they have not received any objection from them. So while I would prefer to have a comment of some kind for the record. I feel that the necessary steps have been taken. With respect to the 7 standards, I do concur with staff. This is a very challenged lot with respect to the shape, with respect to the topography, and with respect to the setbacks. So, and furthermore, I also do note there's a couple pictures in the packet that do indicate it's more of a reinforced slope than an actual retaining wall. So, which from an engineering standpoint, I feel has less of an impact on the setback. So I do intend to support the motion, finding that all 7 standards are met in concurrence with the staff. Mr. Dunham?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that, one of the reasons I'm supporting this request, in addition to all 7 standards being met, is that it's the information we've heard tonight. The lack of comments from a single municipal agency. I don't think we can read anything into that other than the fact that they either didn't feel it was important enough to comment on, or maybe didn't get the comment in on time. But I don't think we can read into that they weren't interested in the case. Maybe they weren't, I don't know. But we have the information before us. Everything else says that this is a reasonable variance.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Mr. Vague?
I appreciate Mr. Dunham's comments on that. I was about to offer up a 4th condition of approval that would be the memo or letter of non-objection from Watershed Management, but I think Mr. Dunham brings up some good points about considering what information we have before us, and I'm willing to go along with that.
Are there any further? Ms. Williams?
I'm not to belabor the point any further, but I think, too, from the testimony of the petitioner, it's clear that Watershed Management did have knowledge of this case and visited the site, and it would seem that if they had any issues with the variance, that they would have been reported back, and we would have had that information in our packet.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Are there any further comments by any of the board? Any other board members? Seeing none, please vote. The motion passes by a vote of 7-0. I do need to read that every final decision of the board shall clearly state on its face it is a final decision with respect to all issues involved in the case, and that the parties have 30 days from the date of mailing or other distribution of the decision to file an appeal to the Superior Court. That brings us to our next case this evening, 2012-042, the petitioners Brian and Katrina Kane. Are the petitioners here this evening? They've indicated so. Could staff provide us with the sufficiency of notice, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On March 20th, 48 public hearing notices were mailed. At the time this report was written, no responses have been received. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. Would you proceed with your presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request for variance from AMC 2140-080F1A, minimum lot requirements to allow an undersized lot, which was platted after zoning, to remain as platted. The subject property is located within the R6 Suburban Residential District and is legally described as Lindale Subdivision Lot 4. It was platted under Plat 83-281, recorded August 2nd, 1983. The R6 district requires a minimum lot size of 54,450 square feet for single-family homes. In calculating lot size, the R6 district allows for the inclusion of one half of the abutting dedicated right-of-way. Individual lot square footage may also vary up to 1%. The subject parcel, as platted, measures 40,620 square feet. The parcel abuts East 112th Avenue to the south and Zelma Circle to the east. One half the abutting right-of-ways are included. The parcel measures 53,485 square feet. After allowing for a 1% variation, the parcel then measures 54,030 square feet. This leaves the parcel 420 square feet short of the minimum lot size requirement for the R6 district. A review of the platting record indicates that the lot size was of concern at the time of platting in 1983. That concern appears to have been addressed to the satisfaction of the municipal platting officer. Plat was subsequently recorded by municipal staff. While it is impossible to determine exactly what transpired during the review of this plat, which allowed for this undersized lot, it seems to me that there are two possibilities. First, it is possible that when calculating the lot size to determine conformance with the R6 regulations, a simple mathematical error was made. Second, and more likely of a scenario, is that the wrong plat was recorded. In reviewing this platting case, it looked as though there were several iterations of the plat, and it's possible that staff recorded the wrong plat. I'd like to address the 7 standards in granting the variance. Standard number 1, staff finds this standard to be substantially met. There does exist an exceptional and extraordinary circumstance in this case. When the lot was platted in 1983, it was reviewed and approved by the municipality of Anchorage. Standard number 2, staff finds this standard to be substantially met. The property has existed in its current configuration since 1983. Review of property records indicate the property has changed hands at least 4 times since it was platted. Replatting the lots to conform fully with the R6 district regulations would have substantial economic impact on the property owners. Standard number 3, staff finds this standard to be met. The petitioners in this case have reviewed and considered all possible conforming alternatives. In this case, the only conforming alternative is to purchase a portion of the abutting property and replat the 2 lots. This alternative would place exceptional and undue hardship on the property owner. Standard number 4, staff finds this standard to be substantially met. This variance, if granted, will not adversely affect the use of adjacent property in the area. The variance will not give the property special privileges. It will not increase traffic in the neighborhood, nor will it change the character of the neighborhood. Standard number 5, staff finds this standard to be met. The granting of this variance is in keeping with the intent of the code and will not change the character of the R6 zoning district. The petitioner's wish is to continue the use of the property under the R6 district regulations as it was platted in 1983. The current use of the property is a single-family home is allowed under the R6 district regulations, and the requested variance will not change the intent of that code. Standard number 6, staff finds this standard to be substantially met. The granting of this variance will not affect the health, safety, or welfare of the people of the municipality of Anchorage. The variance does not alter fire department safety standards, traffic clear vision areas, or Department of Health and Human Services standards. Standard number 7, staff finds this standard to be substantially met. Granting of this variance is the minimum variance that will make possible a reasonable use of the land. This property is 420 square feet short of being a fully conforming lot, and thus staff finds that standard to be met. As all 7 standards required under AMC 2115-010B have been substantially met, the department recommends approval of the variance from AMC 2140-080 F1A to allow an undersized lot which was platted after zoning in the R6 district to remain as platted, subject to one standard listed on page 7 of your staff packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. Are there any questions of staff by any of the board members? Mr. Dunham?
Mr. Whitfield, what would happen if the petitioner hadn't requested a variance?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunham, as I understand it, the petitioners are in the process of selling the property. They have a buyer. Essentially what would happen is the sale of the property would not go through. They would have an illegal lot, and they would have to resolve it in some way. To say that we would open up a code enforcement case or something to the like, I would say that would be unlikely. However, they probably would not be able to sell the property until they resolved it. The only two ways of resolving it is by granting a variance or purchasing a portion of the neighboring property and replatting.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions of the board? Seeing none, could the applicant or applicant's representative come forward, please? And could you state and spell your name for the record, please?
My name is Martina Richardson, M-A-R-T-I-N-A, Richardson, R-I-C-H-A-R-D-S-O-N.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. And just to make sure, you have authorization to represent the petitioners, or I believe one of the applicants is here?
Mr. Kane is right here, and I work with Brian Broderick, who's the listing licensee, and we filed the petition on their behalf.
Thank you.
The reason I'm speaking tonight is because I filled out all the variance paperwork, so I'm most familiar with it.
And that's quite all right. Just want to make sure you have authorization to do so.
Okay.
So, Mr. Kane, you indicated? Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Ms. Richardson. Would you proceed with your presentation, please?
Sure. Hi, my name is Martina Richardson, and I work with Brian Broderick, the listing licensee on this property. I will be speaking for the petitioners because I am most familiar with the variance request. Mrs. Kane is on a business trip, and Mr. Kane is in attendance. Brian Broderick helped Brian and Katrina Kane, the current owners of this property, buy this property in January 2005. The property was in its exact configuration at that time. The sellers in 2005 had an encroachment permit for retaining walls, which did not automatically transfer to the Kanes. In 2005, it was never brought to the Kanes' attention and most likely not noticed by anyone that the lot was less than the minimum size for our R6 lot. It is unknown if the couple who sold the lot to the Kanes in 2005 knew about the nonconforming status. It was not disclosed in their property disclosure. The Kanes entered into a sales agreement to sell their property December 2011. Their buyers requested that the Kanes obtain an encroachment permit for the retaining walls. We, as their listing office, applied for the encroachment permit on their behalf. And at that time, January 2012, while Laura Jo Moeller with the Muni was processing the encroachment paperwork, she found a Muni letter from 1998 that she sent to our office. In 1998, someone named Elaine Taylor had wrote in questioning the nonconforming status of the lot, and the Muni at that time had determined that the property was not a nonconforming lot of record. Elaine Taylor, who wrote the letter, does not show up as having ever owned the lot. We don't know who Elaine Taylor was. She was not the owner of the lot at that time. In the full spirit of disclosure, as soon as we received that information in January 2012, we provided it to the buyers who were scheduled to close February 2012. And when presented with the information, the buyers suspended the purchase unless the seller could obtain a variance. We began the official variance process working with the municipality, which was a very good experience, I might add. What we found was that when the lot was platted in 1983, it was erroneously at that time approved for R6 zoning by the Muni, even though in 1983, evidently, the same size conditions existed. Our sellers, the Canes, believe the lot fits in well with the surrounding properties and graciously request the Board of Examiners in Appeal grant this variance. And then on the written application, I had addressed all the 7 standards, but I'm happy to move forward and verbally say them now if you would prefer.
It is up to you. You have 7 minutes left of your presentation, so.
Okay, well, I don't want to leave a stone unturned. Variance standard number 1 is the exceptional and extraordinary physical circumstance of the subject property. And the home was built in 1968. The property was zoned in 1974. And in 1983, the municipality erroneously approved the platting of the subject lot, even though it was not of minimum size in the R6 zoning district. My first thought on that was that the R6 zoning district was probably had a different size in 1983, 1983, but that was probably naive. That doesn't probably make any sense. But from what the information we have available to us is that the zoning feature that's peculiar to this lot and not applicable to adjacent lot is that I don't think the municipality very often approves lots for platting that doesn't meet the standards. So that's the physical difference of that particular lot. Variance standard number 2. Let's see, the strict application of this code would create an exceptional or undue hardship. It absolutely would. A sale probably would not go through unless now they found an adjacent property owner to sell them a piece of land and replat, and that would be expensive and very time extensive. Standard number 3, the hardship is not self-imposed. The lot has been its current configuration and zoning since the plat was approved in 1983. Nothing really has changed except for some block retaining walls were added that the encroachment permit was granted for. Let's see, and it would be more than a minor inconvenience to attempt to purchase a budding property and rezone. Let's see. This variance would not affect the use of adjacent property as permitted under this code. You cannot tell by driving through the neighborhood at all that there's anything amiss with this property. It doesn't seem smaller or more crowded or closer. It doesn't seem to have any negative impacts at all. It fits in seamlessly. Let's see, standard number 5. Will not change the character. No, it fits very well in the character. It's still low-density residential development. Variance standard number 6. It did not alter the fire department safety standards, traffic clear vision, Department of Health and Human Services, noise levels. There was no problem there. Variance standard 7. This is a minimum variance to make a reasonable use of the land so people that own the land can live there legally, own a legally conforming piece of property for themselves and future owners. I think that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. Are there any questions by the board to the applicant? Does staff have any questions?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You can have a seat, and we will open the hearing up for public testimony. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify this evening? Anyone at all? Seeing no one, the public hearing is closed. Does staff have any rebuttal?
No, Mr. Chair.
Does the petitioner have any rebuttal? They've indicated no rebuttal. With that, the matter rests with the board. I would entertain a positive motion from a board member on this case this evening. Mr. Vig.
Mr. Chairman, in the case of 2012-042, I move that we grant a variance from AMC 2140-080 F1A to allow an undersized lot which was platted after zoning in the R6 district to remain as platted, subject to condition number 1 on page 7 of the staff packet.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Mr. Patrick, have you indicated you would second that motion?
I second it.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Mr. Vig, would you speak to your motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I intend to support the motion. I agree with staff's analysis of this case and find that all the 7 standards are substantially met, in my opinion. The amount of the shortfall in area, if you will, is, while it didn't meet the 1% tolerance, it's very close to 2%, which to me is a very small amount. And so for the reasons that I believe the 7 standards are met and the very minor amount of the shortfall, I plan to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Mr. Patrick.
I, too, intend to support the motion, but I concur with Mr. Vig that I think staff did an excellent job on this and worked through the 7 standards, and they're all met.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Mr. Dunham?
Mr. Chairman, I intend to support the motion as well. I guess I ran the numbers on this twice and didn't come up with the same numbers that staff did, but nevertheless, I think, this property's been in private hands for a while. I don't think it's fair to hold anybody hostage to a mistake that was made almost 30 years ago. So I intend to support the request.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Are there any other comments from any of the board members? I also intend to support the motion, concurring with staff and their findings that all 7 standards are met for the reasons they've indicated. And I also appreciated the comments from the applicant with respect to added information on standard number 2, in that, as staff had mentioned, this property has changed hands 4 times, and at no time has this come up on any of the property disclosure statements in those sales. So for those reasons, I also intend to support the motion. Are there any other comments from any of the board? If not, please vote. That motion passes by a vote of 7-0. Again, I need to read for the record that every final decision of the board shall clearly state on its face it is a final decision with respect to all issues involved in the case, and that the parties have 30 days from the date of mailing or other distribution of the decision to file an appeal to the Superior Court. That brings us to our third case this evening. Which is case 2012-043. Is the petitioner here this evening representing the Foote Jones Revocable Trust? They've indicated they're present. And could staff provide us with a sufficiency of notice, please?
178 public hearing notices were mailed on March 20th. 6 were returned as not deliverable. There were numerous public comments that were received today. These were placed in front of you. Other comments are in your packets. The subject property is an R3 multifamily district. The site is mostly level, and it is currently occupied by a single-family home. The petitioner wishes to develop an apartment building for 15 units, which exceed the number of units allowed given the size of the lot. The lot size of 10,672 square feet under R3 zoning allows up to 7 units. This request doubles that density. The request exceeds the density in the 2020 comprehensive plan. The plan allows up to 40 DUA. This request is for approximately 60 DUA. To meet parking requirements for the 15 units, the majority of the parking is shown on an underground level with a few surface parking spaces. Standard number 1 is partially met, as the 25-foot wide utility easement does reduce the developable area, although the utility easement and the adjacent railroad line are circumstances that are applicable to adjacent lots. Standard number 2 is not substantially met. The lot characteristics do not create an undue hardship upon the property owner to develop the property with up to 7 dwelling units or deprive the owner of the common rights of enjoyment shared by the neighborhood. Standard number 3 is not substantially met. The need for the variance is a result of the actions of the applicant. There is currently a conforming single-family home on the site. If the owner wishes to remove the house and construct an apartment building, that is a self-imposed hardship. Further, the submittal cites that a minimum of 15 units is required to make the project financially feasible. This constitutes pecuniary hardship or inconvenience. Standard number 4 is substantially met. The adjacent buildings are all 3-story multifamily structures. Therefore, the proposal should not have an adverse effect on adjacent property. Standard number 5 is substantially met. The surrounding buildings are 3-story structures, and the proposed use would not change the character of the zoning district. No use will be permitted with the granting of the variance that is not otherwise permitted in the R3 district. Standard number 6 is substantially met. Given the multifamily residential character of the area and the existence of many nearby buildings of 3 or more stories, the requested variance should not adversely affect the health, safety, or the welfare of municipal residents. Should construction of the building occur, the increase in density will result in more cars on neighborhood streets, but this is a characteristic of land development. All required parking will be accommodated on site. No negative comments were received from the traffic department. Improvements to the alley will be required from the southern property line to 6th Avenue should this project go forward. Standard number 7 is partially met. The property owner has a conforming alternative in that the property could be redeveloped within the allowable number of 7 units. The standards are not substantially met, therefore the department recommends denial. However, if after the public hearing the board establishes findings that each of the 7 standards is substantially met, the department recommends approval subject to the conditions on page 7 of your packet. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Are there questions of staff by the board? Mr. Patrick.
Yes. My question is on the parking. According to code, how many units are required for parking in this 15-plex?
Excuse me, I didn't hear your whole question. How many units?
How many units are required for parking at this location?
How many units are required for parking?
Yeah.
How many parking spaces are required?
Yeah.
The code says there are 19 parking spaces required for the 15 units with an additional 3 as overflow parking for a total of 22 parking spaces. And if you look on page 20 of your packet, you'll see where they have shown those 20 spaces. There are 15 underground parking spaces, and then the additional parking spaces are surface parking lots as shown on the plan on page 20.
I'm not seeing that on page 20, Ms. Ferguson.
You don't have that on page 20?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Mr. Patrick.
So as a follow-up, then they're two spaces short?
No, all 22 are there.
Oh, I'm sorry, I see through 20.
Then if you look off the driveway, there are 2 parking spaces right in the immediate area of the driveway from 6th Avenue. From the alley and 6th Avenue, the intersection. One is drawn in with an AutoCAD and the other 2 are hand-drawn. Do you see those?
On page 21?
On page 20.
Oh, yes, I see them. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions of staff by the board? Any at all? If not, could the applicant come forward, please? And could you state and spell your name for the record, please?
Mr. Chairman, board members, my name is Kenneth Lang, L-A-N-G. I'm here this evening in behalf of the petitioner, the Foote Jones Revocable Trust. With me is Grace Pleasance, who also represents the trust. Although the staff has recommended denial, 3 of the 7 standards for a variance have been met, and 2 of the standards have been partially met. We believe our application has merit and should be approved by the board. I'd like to begin by bringing your attention to a 2012 study recently posted on the planning website titled Anchorage Housing Market Analysis. The purpose of this study, commissioned by the department, was to conduct a technical analysis of the housing demand in the Anchorage Bowl from 2010 to 2030. The study found a need for 18,184 new housing units and a land capacity of only 11,000 units. We've been told for years that the Anchorage Bowl is running out of land, and this study confirms this and recommends the following, and I quote, "Without increasing the current level of housing density and increasing the rate of redevelopment, the Anchorage Bowl will lack land for about 8,900 of the projected new housing units, or about half of the expected demand." End quote. Throughout the report, the underlying theme is to increase densities either by increasing the allowable number of multifamily units per acre, reducing the required parking, or in the case of single-family developments, reducing the minimum lot size. Some of these recommendations are in the process of being implemented. Under the new Title 21, the Bootlegger Cove housing densities will be increased. In this case, in the case of our parcel, the allowable density would increase from 7 units to 12 units. Many of the other regulatory changes will be needed to reach the necessary housing goals specified in the study, however. Now to get to the specifics regarding meeting the variance standards, staff has reported that standards 4, 5, and 6 are met. So I will limit our presentation to standards 1, 2, 3, and 7. Regarding standard 1, which the report is partially met, we would add that in addition to the utility easement that impacts the lot, there is a sanitary sewer line which runs diagonally through the easement area. And because of this, it was necessary to angle the northeast corner of the building to meet the minimum AWW setbacks from the sewer line. In addition, the westerly property line runs at an angle which required the westerly building line to be run at an angle. The standard is perhaps the most difficult to justify, except that due to the limitations placed on the lot as a result of the easement, the sewer line, and the angled lot line to the west, it was necessary to construct an oddly shaped building which will greatly increase the construction costs, thereby necessitating more units to make the project financially feasible. Although it's not a consideration of yours, you should be aware that this property has been for sale for a year, and because of the assessed value of the lot by the municipality, there have been no offers to purchase. Yet it is a very desirable lot because of its proximity to the downtown amenities, to its location adjacent to the Tony Knowles Coastal Trail, and its unobstructed, unobstructed view of the inlet. Regarding standard number 3, as we stated in our application, the applicant is not responsible for the unusual shape of the lot, the underlying zoning, or the unusually high municipal assessment for the property. All of these factors taken together justify a hardship and justify the higher density requested. Standards 4, 5, and 6 have been substantially met. Regarding standard number 7, which is partially met, we would add that the remainder of this block is developed with multi-story, multi-family structures. We've designed a building that meets the zoning requirements for setbacks, parking, and open space. And what we are proposing falls in line with the recommendations of the new Title 21 and the new Anchorage Housing Market Analysis Report, which I mentioned earlier. We strongly urge the board to consider granting this variance, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Are there any questions of the applicant by the board? Mr. Dunham.
Mr. Lang, several of the comments that we received tonight talk about not enough parking on this property to meet the need, the narrow streets in the neighborhood, traffic congestion that would be created by this proposed use, and that the density is too high. I guess I'm waiting to hear from you why, how these will be mitigated, I guess.
Okay, with regard to the parking and the traffic circulation, if you look at our parking garage plan, which is on page 24 of your packet, will be, well, first of all, as Ms. Ferguson was asked regarding the number of parking spaces, they are by code sufficient for the property to be, so they'll be all on site. With regard to traffic circulation, the vehicles would enter the garage from at the northeast corner and exit, that's from 6th Avenue and the alley, and exit onto O Street on the west side of the property. That should cut the traffic impact by about half right there.
you have any further
I guess
questions?
I'm looking at, I won't even call it a street. It looks like it's a half-dedicated street that's in front of the property, and having a hard time understanding how we're going to put a development on that property that's twice the density that's normally allowed for that residentially zoned property, and still keep the street clear and free of congestion. And I guess I haven't heard anything that convinces me otherwise at this point. But I'm willing to listen.
Mr. Lang, do you have anything further to add to address Mr. Dunham's comment?
Not at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Are there any further questions of the applicant by the board? Mr. Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lang, I do have a question about emergency services equipment access. There was a comment, I believe, from the Transportation Department about ensuring turning radii for emergency services equipment. Has that been incorporated into your traffic flow pattern and parking design?
Excuse me. It would be unlikely that any fire trucks would need to enter the property at all. We have streets on both sides, and if there was to be a fire, they could, they would stay in the street. They wouldn't drive onto the lot. So turning shouldn't be a factor.
Can you clarify for me which streets exactly you think they'd be turning into? Is it the alley that Mr. Dunham was asking about, or O Street, or all the above?
They could come from both directions.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Does staff have any questions of the applicant?
No, I don't, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. We will open the hearing for public testimony. If you'll have a seat, please. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify? If you'll come forward, will you state and spell your name for the record?
My name is Richard Mystrom, M-Y-S-T-R-O-M.
Thank you, Mr. Mystrom, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay. I run my family business, and we own the property at 6th and N, directly east. It's a 10-unit complex directly east of the building. It was built in 1962. And in that neighborhood, there are a lot of traffic issues. There's a lot of congestion, and the streets really get down to one lane. You know, there are 2 dead-end streets coming into that lot, basically, with an alley abutting. And everybody parks nose in. We've got from 6th to N Street, we have that whole piece of property there, and all my tenants park nose in. So really everybody needs to back out into that street. And it creates a big issue in the winter when the plows come through. They really make the street a lot smaller. Also, you know, you look at hardship being self-imposed, and it's tough when you buy a property or you own a property and you want to change it. You know, it is, by nature, this is self-imposed, I think, when you want to, it's a financial self-imposition. You know, they're not meeting the requirements. They could build a 4-unit condo complex. They could build a 7-unit condo complex. They could do something else with the property. To the north of this property, it's all single-family homes all the way up to the park on 5th Avenue. So it's all single-family homes north of this. South of this and east, it's all multifamily. And then also, they talk in there that we're a budding business in their hardship, or adverse use. I believe in the hardship, they're talking about how the neighborhood abuts, or the property abuts office and business. Well, those office and business zoning districts are above the bluff, And this is about the farthest property from those two districts. So hopefully you keep that in mind. This property isn't directly adjacent to those two districts. It's about as far from those districts as you can get. So I'm really against it. I'd love to have a great 7-unit complex down there that help the property value out in the neighborhood, but I think 15 is way too many. Thanks. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mystrom. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone? Again, could you state and spell your name, please?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Everett Hightower, E-V-E-R-E-T-T, last name Hightower, H-I-G-H-T-O-W-E-R.
Thank you, Mr. Hightower, and again, you have 3 minutes for testimony.
Understood. Thank you. First, let me say I appreciate the public notice and the opportunity to testify. I'm here to express my objection to any waiver allowing increase in density beyond what is presently zoned for this property because of the general stress that I think that would be imposed on this neighborhood, owning property in that neighborhood, being familiar with high density, and there is some, and I understand the demand for housing in this community, and I would say that let 7 units address the need for additional housing in the municipality of Anchorage, that's adequate and within present regulations, but 15 units would definitely impose additional burden in this neighborhood. I believe there's also some lingering evidence in this neighborhood where the municipality hasn't perhaps managed similar property as effectively, the development of similar high-density property. The M Street is a good example of that. And so I think that this is too much and too little. And that's my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Hightower. Are there any questions of Mr. Hightower this evening by the board? Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify? If so, please come forward. State and spell your name for the record.
Patricia Fredrickson Wells, and it's W-E-L-L-S. Fredrickson, my middle is F-R-E-D-E-R-I-C-K-S-O-N. I'm in here on behalf of my mom, Pearl Fredrickson, who owns a property at 618 N Street. It's 2 places down, kitty corner from the Foots home. I have pictures that I brought. If I can pass them out to you, it's a collage. And if you'll follow me, I'll just certainly explain. Can I do that?
You can, however, we will need to keep those. If you want to submit them, we'll have to keep the pictures for 30 days.
You can have them.
Okay. You'll bring forward and we'll have to, excuse me, ma'am, Ms. Wells, could you bring the forward so we can log them in? Okay. Are they? Yeah.
Anyway,
just give us 1 second.
Okay. They're all the same.
You got yours, right?
Number 1, if you look at it, is their site that they want to tear down, the house that's existing there now. And you can see that if you look where the front of the house is right now, there's actually a garage there that goes down underground. And when the Funkhausers owned this house, it flooded out many times in the basement. And if you look at the parking drawing, I believe it is on page 20, you'll see that in their drawing of where they're going to have their parking, they do have, it is on page, let's see here, let me find it. They have their underground parking with the entrance going down like this on both sides from O Street and the alley side. And I find it very hard to believe that unless that is heated, that will not flood out in the wintertime, the way that they have that underground parking. And also, on number 2, it's the alley. Very small, in the wintertime when they plow the snow, there's only one single car that you can even go down the alley with. You cannot even hardly turn around in that area, let alone back out of your own parking area to even get going down the street. Number 3, you'll see that that is the apartment that's built beside them. They have straight in-ground parking. You don't have the underground theory there. They have straight drive-in parking on both sides of their apartment building on both ends for adequate parking. You never see people parking in the alley at any time, in any of the places that are on the alley side. And number 4, you can see the Cove, which Richard Mystrom just talked about, where he has parking, adequate parking for their apartment building. And I find it very hard to believe that people parking out of this 15 unit are not going to run into everybody else that's over at the Cove. And number 3, or 5, on N Street, that was taken about 3 o'clock today. There was a lot of cars parked there now, but 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, there'll be triple that many cars on N Street. And you can barely even get by on N Street in the evening, let alone the alley. Number 6 is if you look on O Street on the back side of their apartment facing the railroad tracks, that is a fence that's built there. O Street dead ends on that side there. There's not even any through road to there whatsoever. Their fence right now on the Foote Jones house is clear across there with no access to the back of their lot. Number 7 is the snow on the side that got deep this year, but you can see the utility poles that are facing almost right onto the alley. They butt right up to the alley. And number 8, it's also a picture of their fence going across, so you can see that there is no through alley road or through road on O Street. And number 9 is just a picture of the snow that they plowed from O Street on the dead end where their fence goes by on their property. And you have to remember in 1964, this land below L Street slid 11 feet. And so can I talk for my mother too and then for myself? My mom's 90. She has a hard time standing.
I appreciate that. You can speak for, you're able to either represent yourself or her, but you have 3 minutes.
Okay. So Mom can...
No, she isn't. Right.
Okay. So I can speak for myself now?
No, I'm sorry.
So that's it?
You can speak for 3 minutes.
Oh, okay.
And so whether you're representing one person or...
Okay, all right.
If she could come up and speak, or we could get the microphone to her.
All right. So any questions? Or?
Are there questions of Ms. Wells? Seeing none?
Nothing.
Thank you for the pictures. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify? If so, please come forward. If you want to position yourself closer to stake your place, please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Carol Brenner, CarolBryner. I am a property owner in the neighborhood. I own a single-family house, and the property taxes are high, but that's the hardship you put up with to live in this area. I would not call it a hardship, and I can't understand how somebody making a big development could possibly consider the property taxes as a hardship. But there are hardships. One of them is snow in the winter. There is absolutely no place in the alley to put the snow. The other is we're all nervous about the fire access because there was a huge fire last summer in our neighborhood, and the fire trucks had a hard time getting to the place. These are not streets, these are alleys. They may be called streets, but they are not streets. They are small, narrow, dirt alleys. I can't see how they can be improved very much without taking out somebody's backyard. So those are my 2 objections. Okay, too high density.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bremer. Are there any questions? Thank you. Again, could you
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Janine Oros Aman, and that's spelled JANINEOROSAMON.
Thank you, Ms. Amon. Again, you have 3 minutes.
I'm opposed to the variance. The size of the lot is simply insufficient for a building with this number of units. I also disagree that number 5 was substantially met. I do feel it will substantially change the character of this area. I mean, it's going to, you're absolutely right, Mr. Dunham, that is an alley. It is not a road in front of the building. I think it's going to affect pedestrians, bicycle riders, children, dogs, the people who use that alley on a daily basis to get back and forth between the two parks. And for this reason, I don't believe that number 6 was met. In other words, the variance, if granted, I think it does adversely affect the health, safety, and welfare of the people in the area, because I feel like it's certainly not going to be the same neighborhood if we have this enormous building stacked up in the corner there. I also have some question that the parking is adequate. Both architects that went online and made statements, neither of them felt that the parking garage design was adequate for the space. And in fact, everybody I contacted in the neighborhood virtually is opposed to the building as it is proposed. There's a number of other people, including Bob Poe, who assured me he would make a comment opposing it very soon. We'd love for Grace to do something else with the land. We would welcome new neighbors, and I understand about the concern and that more density is needed in Anchorage, but I just feel that the development should be done on lots that can appropriately and adequately support the development. And I request respectfully that you deny the variance. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rosamond. Is there anyone with any from the board with questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, please state and spell your name.
My name is Frank Koziol. The last name is spelled K-O-Z-I-O-L.
I'm sorry, one more time.
K-O-Z-I-O-L.
Thank you, Mr. Koziol. You have 3 minutes.
I own the property at 500 N Street, which is one of the single-family dwellings to the north of this property. It's near Elderberry Park. I've lived there the last 5 years, and I've been in Alaska the last 40 years. I also support the staff's recommendation that you deny this variance. I want to expand upon something that Ms. Brenner said, Carol Brenner. You know, if you look at the submission by Mr. Lang, he's asserting that the reason why they couldn't build the 7 residential units is because the taxes are too high. Now, that's a rather curious statement. Number one, Mr. Lang is representing the property owners, the trust, but the real people in interest is the developer. There's been a disclosure that the developer is the Boulevard Company, and one would think that the real party in interest, the Boulevard Company, would somehow justify that statement, and I don't see how the trust can make that statement and have any credibility attached to it. One other thing, and everybody may gripe about property taxes, but everybody are paying their property taxes and doesn't seem to be inhibiting development in isolation. That is the reason that they're giving you for the hardship. The other comment I'd like to make is Mr. Lang, when he was presenting to you, he said that the reason this property didn't sell was because of the high property taxes. Now, I wonder what the support for that is. Actually, my wife and I looked at the property with a view to buying it, and we did not buy it because of the high property taxes. That's just a fact of life. So that unsupported statement, I think, should be viewed by you with skepticism. And I'd also like to reiterate that the parking on N Street, where we live, is incredibly congested. When I left today at Elderberry Park, and there's no parking there at all, and it spills over into N Street, and oftentimes N Street becomes a one-way street. One would think that probably will only be increased by your granting this variance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Koziel. Are there any questions as he walks away? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay.
Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify? Again, please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Marty Beckwith, Beckwith.
Thank you, Ms. Beckwith. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I also am a resident in the neighborhood. I'm one of the single-family homeowners, so in the area that is not all multifamily zoning. I wanted to say I oppose this variance. I agree with the planning and zoning recommendation that the variance be denied. With regard to the findings that were made by the board, I disagree that they're on number 1. They say the standard is partially met, that there were exceptional and extraordinary physical circumstances of the subject property. If you live down in Bootleggers Cove, you are near the railroad tracks. Your lots are all at an odd angle. They're long and narrow. They're usually 150 by 50 feet. There's nothing that's particularly physically unusual about this lot. It's identical to the size of my lot. The fact that there's a 25-foot water easement to the north, he took subject to that. There's nothing unusual about that property that I can see. So I disagree with the finding number 1, even finding that it's partially met. I also agree that the granting if this variance were allowed and allowing 21 or 15 units to be built on this property, I believe would change the character of the neighborhood. There are multifamily buildings there, but they have adequate parking, such as the Cove, such as the unit of the fourplex that's right next to this building. And I also wanted to speak lastly to address the issue raised by the proponent of the variance about public safety and fire. I've lived in the neighborhood for 28 years. I've been there for a number of fires, and the fire trucks always park in front of my house. And the only place they have to park is along N Street because they can't make the radius of the turns when there is the fires that there have been there on 6th Avenue. They have to, they cannot, they're too long. And they sometimes take up the width of 2 houses in front of my neighbor's house, Mr. Treadwell, and mine. They have to park there, and they cannot make the radius of the turn there. And I think increasing the density and not really understanding the nature of those narrow alleys, it would be a mistake and would increase. I just think it's a burden on public safety, and it's hard for the rest of us in the neighborhood to deal with the increased density. So I oppose the variance.
Thank you, Ms. Beckwith. Are there any questions by the board? Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mead Treadwell, M-E-A-D, Treadwell, T-R-E-A-D-W-E-L-L. I'm a neighbor. I'd have to say I knew Mrs. Funkhauser, who lived in the property for many, many years. We met, actually I knew her husband better than I knew her. She warned me before she died that when she died there would be something big and ugly put up. And I guess I'll say this, I've known Grace Pleasance, the developer, all of my time in Alaska, over 35 years, and I've never seen her build anything ugly. But I do know it'll be big. And I think whatever you do, the footprint of the property will be about there equally. And if there's any variance at all, I've got a couple of suggestions for mitigation, but I'm not sure I support the variance. Part of the problem with the city's effort to get to greater density is there's really been a war on families in our neighborhood. Mill Bay Park, right across the street from the property, took out its swing set. When a big multifamily home went up there, there was no kind of safe corridor for my kids, no sidewalk for my kids to go to that, no private park. School buses won't go down there. We've never had school bus service to our neighborhood, and I've raised 3 children there. And what has been said to date about the alleys and the parking is a real problem. We have now, when I first lived in the neighborhood, I've lived in 5 houses in the neighborhood. We had horses in a lot next to us. Now you've got big multifamily buildings going up on things that didn't even have address. They had to create street names just a while ago. And then what's been said about density of parking, on a sunny day like today, we'll get literally hundreds of people show up to park someplace in the neighborhood to ride the bike trail. And there's just not a whole lot of room for additional parking there. So if you do grant variances, and I realize that with this property there will be a big building there, the right to build 7 units, or if we're going to change to go to 12, and I don't understand the 2020 plan. But there's really 2 or 3 things that I think you should realize. Number one, if you grant a major variance here now, there are probably 5 or 6 lots that I could point to, and even possibly my own house, where the economic alternative is going to put up also something very big and multifamily. And I don't think that's the character of the neighborhood that we want. You know, so you'd be setting a major precedent, as I see it. Second, if you do this, you really got to go back to the city and talk about the alley situation. You can't build houses on big multifamily units on single-lane streets. They turned one of them just a block away into a one-way street to mitigate the problem, but it's not really the appropriate way to do planned development. And the third is that if you go ahead and do this, they're talking about vacating the 6th, that place between 6th and O, and there really ought to be access around to Mill Bay Park, so you could drive on 6th Avenue around to Mill Bay Park rather than just create much more congestion there. So those are 3 possible mitigation things if you did go ahead, but the variance sets off some very difficult precedents for people in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Treadwell. Are there any questions of the board? Thank you. Anyone else from the public wishing to testify? Anyone at all? Okay. I know.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and planning members. My name is Grace Pleasance. Do I need to spell my last name?
Before you do, you are the applicant, so your time is part of the 10 minutes that Mr. Lang had.
Okay.
However, you do have 4 minutes and 54 seconds of rebuttal, but it will have to be after the public hearing is
All right.
closed. So if you have a seat there, we'll see if there's any other testimony. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing no one, the public hearing is closed. Does staff have any rebuttal?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Ms. Pleasance, or you or Mr. Lang, you have, again, now I'll let you spell your name.
Okay. My last name is spelled Pleasants.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Pleasance. And you have 4 minutes, 54 seconds.
Okay. I'm standing here before you to discuss the 2 issues that the staff recommendations with respect to denial or not substantially met, standard number 2 and standard number 3. On standard number 2, as it's already been noted, there is a 25-foot utility easement, and after I approached AWWU regarding this utility easement, they had indicated that they would support a 15-foot utility easement like most of the property owners in Anchorage. It's unfortunate that there has been this 6th Street easement that has not been vacated. I'm more than prepared to approach the city and vacate that easement to a proper 15-foot easement. On standard number 3, regarding the new Title 21 revision to the R3, when I went into the city staff and spoke to Mr. Al Barrett, at times we discussed the amount of density that this lot could have. I'm a lifelong Anchorage person, and I commute between Anchorage and the Northwest, and I do multifamily developments in a number of communities. In looking at other communities, I was a bit surprised to see that our density was so low. In almost across the board in our zonings. And one of the things that Mr. Barrett and I discussed was that the new proposed R3 zoning will allow up to 12 units in the new, I guess not approved, Title 21 revisions that are being, I guess, reviewed by the city right now. And so when I was looking at the floor plans of what we could do with this development, 15 became a very logical number, primarily because an urban dwelling, more of a upscale loft apartments, 700 to 800 square feet are where the market's at, and that's how I kind of designed this project. We're looking at building this project green. We're also reusing the landscaping on the site. We're looking at donating the property landscaping to the park, as well as reusing the house. We've made a number of contacts with local nonprofits about taking the house. I wanted to let you know with respect to a lifelong Anchorage person, I'm also a very dear friend of the family, the Funkhauser Foote Jones family, and I've known them since I was like 2 years old. Mrs. Funkhauser, as well as her daughters, informed me, and I was a bit surprised to see comments that there hasn't been flooding in the basement, and so one of the things that was surprising to see is comments about the flooding on the site. I do know that there are ways of mitigating water transmission in a parking garage, and that's what we will be looking at dealing with. The lot that we have here is substantially larger than most of the single-family lots in the neighborhood, and as you know, there is a tremendous amount of multifamily developments in that neighborhood. I look for your consideration on supporting this variance. It adds to more of the urban density fabric that Anchorage is looking forward to, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Pleasant. Are any questions? Mr. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the Chair, Ms. Pleasance, you mentioned this will be a green development. What accommodations for alternative transportation have you incorporated into the design? I don't see anything on the site plans that would indicate alternative transportation.
Well, we're looking, with respect to the unit count, as you noticed, it's a 15-unit apartment project. We're looking at encouraging the residents to have one car, if no cars at all. We've been talking about possibly even a smart car situation for the residents so that we don't have to be impacting the heavier traffic issues that the neighborhood has brought up. This is a walkable site. Into the attractiveness of this site, to be honest with you, has been the fact that people can walk to work, people can walk to play and go and enjoy the neighborhood as well as downtown Anchorage. So we are going to be marketing this project not only from a building green standard, but also from walkable marketability.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Pleasant.
Thank you.
And with that, the matter rests with the board. Could I have a positive motion in this case? My board member, please. Mr. Dunham. Would you care to make a motion, Mr. Dunham? Or,
You need a second for it?
well, I think I jumped the gun earlier. I need to hear the motion before they make the second.
Okay, I'll go ahead and make the motion. Mr. Chairman, in the case of 2012-043, I move that the board grant a variance from AMC 2140-050F to allow greater density than 7 units on this petitioned lot, subject to conditions listed by staff on page, just a second, page 7.
And those are 4 standards, or 4 conditions that they've listed?
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Could I have a second to the motion, please? Mr. Ron, you've indicated you will second that motion.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Mr. Dunham, would you speak to your motion, please?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to support my motion, and it's for the reasons that I stated earlier, and the testimony tonight convinces me that The request is too dense for the property that we have in front of us. The lot fronts essentially an alley, and we've heard testimony tonight from the community that that alley is a very congested alley. And it's congested for a lot of reasons, snow storage for one, and the high use of Elderberry Park and other places, and the coastal trail is another. And I'm concerned that adding a property to this area that is that high a density would create an even greater number of vehicles moving through the area, creating a nearly impossible situation for the neighbors. Essentially creating a hardship for them, not for the petitioner. But I'll go through the conditions, standards for approval. I don't agree with staff that condition number 1 was met. While I believe that there are unusual circumstances regarding this property, I believe those circumstances are such that they warrant a density that's within the normal range allowed by the zoning ordinance, and does not warrant a higher density than what the zoning ordinances allow. For condition number 2, I agree with staff that that standard was not substantially met. Standard number 3, I also agree that that was not substantially met. I agree that this is a self-imposed hardship, that it will in fact create a hardship for the neighborhood, and not necessarily for the petitioner. And the petitioner's alleging a hardship here. I don't believe that that there is one for the petitioner. There will be for the neighborhood if we grant the variance. Number 4, the standard is variance, if granted, would not adversely affect the use of the adjacent property as permitted under this code. I actually believe that that standard was not met either. I think that there could be situations where life or safety might be in jeopardy because of the increased density and the number of cars on the street. Standard number 5, the variance, if granted, is in keeping with the intent of this code, will not change the character of the zoning district in which the property is located, and will not permit a use that is not otherwise permitted in this district. I think that's questionable. I don't believe that standard is met. While high density is allowed under R3, I don't believe that R3 always envisioned, when R3 was formed, I don't believe that it envisioned having a multi-family property facing an alley on a very heavily used road or street. So I question whether or not that standard's actually met. Standard number 6, the variance, if granted, would not adversely affect health, safety, or welfare of the people in the municipality of Anchorage. I think we've heard some testimony tonight that there could be a situation here where safety and welfare of the people that live in this area would be in danger if the density were increased and the number of vehicles were substantially increased on this street. And standard number 7, the variance granted is the minimum variance that would make possible reasonable use of the land. I don't believe that this is the minimum variance. A minimum variance is something that doesn't double the density for the land, and that's what we've got before us. So for those reasons, I'm not going to support this request.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Mr. Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with Mr. Dunham's findings of fact regarding standards 1 through 4, as well as 6 and 7. I would state that I don't believe standard 5 is met, in that I don't believe this amount of overdensity is in keeping with the intent of the code that we're considering tonight. I do not intend to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Are there other comments from board members? Mr. Patrick.
I do not intend to support the motion. I do not intend to support the motion. Looking at items, standards 5 and 6, that I do believe that will change the character of that property, and I think it's not real good for that. Item number 7, I have real concerns about the health and safety. I do not believe a fire truck can go down that alleyway with and get there and take care of business that they need to take care of. So I have real concerns with those two issues. So with that, I'm not going to support this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Are there other board member comments? Any other board member comments? I also do not intend to support the motion, concurring with the findings of staff, Mr. Dunham, Ron, and Patrick. Any other comments? If not, please vote. That motion fails by a vote of 7 no votes, 0 yes votes. Again, I need to read for the record that every final decision of the board shall clearly state on its face it is a final decision with respect to all issues involved in the case, and that the parties have 30 days from the date of mailing or other distribution of the decision to file an appeal to the Superior Court. That, I believe, concludes our public hearings this evening. Moving on to our agenda, reports. Reports of the chairman. Appreciate the patience as I work through our consent agenda issue. Jill will straighten me out here in no time. Other than that, I have no other comments. Are there any other comments by board members? Ms. Ferguson, you by chance don't know what the status of our caseload is for next month, do you?
I'm afraid I don't.
Okay. And board members' attendance next month? Anyone planning to be out? Sounds like, go ahead, Mr.
Chairman, I may be out.
All right. Mr. Patrick?
I may be, but
All right.
not sure.
Well, based on what happened today, there's always the flu bug. I'm sorry to hear Ms. Denny came up with something, but I know it's been going around. If there are no other, I'm sorry. She said, do you have any reports, Ms. Ferguson?
I don't, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks. Can we adjourn? Now, we're adjourned.